Hi guys, thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to take the CR-10s Pro and we've already removed the capacitive sensor and we're going to replace it with a BLTouch. So my personal preference is to have a contact sensor like the BLTouch. I tend to swap out build surfaces. I might be printing on this plain glass. I might be printing on the glass with the build surface that this particular one came with. Maybe I'm going to be using the textured surface or glass with PI or something. I don't have to worry about recalibrating anything when I change those surfaces. And a contact sensor like the BLTouch is not affected by temperature or humidity as capacitor sensors can be. As I said earlier, this particular unit has had the sensor already removed and the zip ties removed from the wire loom and the PTFE tube there. So obviously we're going to need a BLTouch, and in our case, to make our lives easier, we're going to use the extension cables. In this case, it's the EX1000s, so that's nice and makes the installation quick and simple. And we need a mount for this. So this mount adapter, we'll put the link to the Thingiverse item down below in the description. This adapter will replace the collar that used to hold the original sensor and allow us to mount the BLTouch facing down. And then, of course, we're changing to a BLTouch. We're going to need to flash the firmware. The guys at Tiny Machines have done a great job kind of cracking the firmware for this unit, both the screen and the board firmware, Marlin. We'll go through configuring that and flashing that onto here and then go through your normal Z offset routine and demonstrate the BLTouch working. So without further ado, the first thing we're going to need to do here is just unplug to make sure nothing's energized. We're going to take the shroud off. To do that, it's just these two M3 screws there. So this particular collar here is bolted through this back plate from behind. So to get to those two screws, we're actually going to need to take this entire plate off the rail. The easiest way I find to do that, take the bottom wheel and completely unbolt it from the assembly, and we should be able to lift it right off. So after removing that bottom wheel, slide the belt out of the grooves in this red plate. So we're going to slide, I just slid that out like that. It might make it easier to release the tension on the belt to give you a little more slack to play with. And then on the back side of this piece, these two, we're going to unbolt those. And this just comes straight off. And then the adapter is just going to bolt on here using M3 screws. So you may be able to get away with the stock screws. They stick through just far enough, but because I have a kit at my disposal, I'm just going to get a little bit longer of an M3 screw, and we're going to need nuts. Now they've got little recessed sections here for the nut to actually slide into to hold it. And I may need to press these in. Might be a tight fit. And if these don't fit, then I'll just do them the other way and put the nuts on the back side of the plate. Yeah, perfect. So the nuts actually sit inside the grooves like that. You have to make sure that they're rotated, matching the cutout for them. All right, so I've got the nuts stuck in there. Like I said, just make sure they're rotated properly, and you should drop them right in the top. It's going to be almost impossible to slide them in from the sides. And then I've got M3x8 here, just two of those. And so this is convenient because then we don't need a wrench on one side while we're screwing this thing in. And so make sure we're orienting this right. It's going to be like that. So once you bolt it on, it should be this way, making like an L shape. If you have it up like that, it's going to be too high, and the tip for the BLTouch won't come down far enough. So mount it that way. And then there's 2 more spots for captive nuts on the bottom of it, and those are for the BLTouch nuts. So let's open this package now. So here's the BLTouch and the pigtails that I mentioned earlier. This comes with about 6 inches or so. The BLTouch in the bag here comes with the hardware for mounting it. Normally, you use these springs in between your BLTouch and your mount assembly to give you a little bit of adjustability as far as height is concerned. The way that this adapter bracket here is designed, the BLTouch is actually going to sit kind of down in the top and be bolted down through the top. So there's no adjustability required, or it's not designed to have any adjustability really. That's a little bit tight with the connector on there. So you may need to do a little bit of wiggle work to get it through there. It's tight against the connector at the back, but it slides in down through the top. And then these screws that it comes with, which are Phillips head screws, drop those down in the top, and we're gonna put the captive nuts in those slots at the bottom. So before we put the BLTouch in here, I think it's probably going to be best to kind of press the BLTouch nuts into these little spots. These ones actually fit with a little bit of slack. The 2 for the for bolting through the bracket there, I had to really press in. Hopefully those don't fall out. Slide this guy in here. So due to the nature of time lapse, that probably looked a lot easier than it was. The nuts on the bottom there weren't really press fit, so they fell out on me a bunch of times, but I got these ridiculously long screws in there, holding it good and tight. It's pretty level. It shouldn't matter if it's on a little bit of an angle, it's not too bad. And then just kind of reassemble this the way we took it off. So now we'll just bolt the wheel back onto the back. Make sure you put the eccentric nut in there so that the flanged area of the eccentric nut comes through the metal plate there. All right, so I got that bottom wheel bolted back up, and I've tensioned the eccentric nut so that everything's making good contact, rolling back and forth smoothly. I'm going to reattach the wheel. As I kind of mentioned when I took it apart, we may be best suited to release the tension on there to make getting this back onto the bracket a little bit easier. Just loosen those and slide that bracket all the way in. That should get us the extra slack needed. Perfect. Tension that back up. All right, so at this point, I could bolt this assembly back on here and just make sure that these are fed up through the top here. Like that. And then we'll work on feeding the wires up through that wire loom to give it a stock finish. And then I'll kind of slinky this over by compressing it to expand, slide them in, and slowly feed them up through to the back corner here underneath the filament runout sensor, and then we'll run them down into the control box. So I've turned the printer around, obviously. I've run it through the nylon sleeve or the plastic sleeve here, and I've just zip tied this loosely. I don't want to pinch any of the wires inside. I've re-zip tied this back and back to the bracket here. There's another spot for a second zip tie at the top there. I've raised the Z obviously to the top, and that's just to check that I have enough cable, which is why we suggested at least a 1500 millimeter length. Just to keep things kind of neat, I'm going to follow this generally and then go inside the box in that corner. And I'm just going to feed them through this black box. With any luck, they'll come out the other side. So to clean this up even further and kind of make it match the rest, I've got a length of nylon braided sleeve here, and I'll just feed these through much like I did in the sleeve up here. So I've fed it all the way up, and I used a lighter to seal the edges so that it doesn't kind of fray out. And I've left a little extra wire, then I have sleeve. And there's a hole, let's spin this around. There's a hole right here in front of this extrusion, right in front of the motor. There's also one at the back, but I'd be a little bit worried that the cable would get caught as the bed moves back and forth. So right here, I think we'll feed these in there. And then we'll probably zip tie this along here to follow that path. Lucky for me, I've already got the bottom off of this unit. So I can show you where this comes out. Pull the extra slack in. And then here's obviously the control board that this needs to plug into. So on the control box, we have one JST connector on the end of our extension cable. That's going to go to the Z-min right here. The 2 pins on the left or top, depending on your orientation. And with the extension cable, this only goes in one way. There's a 3-pin connector on it. Give myself a little extra slack here. So, perfect. Okay, so there you go. There's a 3-pin connector, JST connector on there with only 2 pins occupied for the white and black cable. So that's for Z-min. And then the other 3 that we have here, they're in one kind of 3-prong connector, and we need to break that out into 3 separate connectors. Luckily for us, the BLTouch kit comes with individual DuPont sleeves for the pins to slide into. So we'll need to take these pins out, and we'll do so by bending these little plastic flaps here that kind of lock them in. We'll bend those flaps outwards towards us. We'll be able to slide the pins out, and then we'll slide them into these individual single connectors because they connect to, where am I? They connect to this pin and that pin and that pin, which correspond to the video that, or the picture, sorry, that we presented to you earlier. So I'll get these split out into individuals, and we'll be back in a second. Okay, I'm gonna move this cable out of the way for the screen just to give us some visibility. So I need orange, brown, and red. So orange, it's kind of yellowish, goes into this bottom corner pin there. Brown connects to this middle one on the top, and red to the one beside it. There. Orange, brown, red. And then reconnect this. So we don't have a whole lot of slack here. My main concern is to make sure that this stays away from the bed. So I'm probably going to zip tie this. I could print a little clip to hold this here, but I'll probably just zip tie this there, and then to the ribbon cable like this. So we'll have to see if this cable ends up buckling inwards. We may have to actually attach the 2 of these. I might do that with like a fabric tape that I have. I don't really want to use zip ties on this and compress this. But I'll run this up and down and see that this wire stays out of the way. That's a good sign, BLTouch activated. So I homed all axes. Keep your finger on the power button though, because the BLTouch hasn't activated. The firmware doesn't know that it has a BLTouch, so it's still expecting the old sensor. But I just wanted to see that everything is moving around properly. It's going down into the middle in the center of the bed as expected. And the BLTouch activated when we turned it on. So I'm kind of happy with what I see so far. Now we're going to flash the mainboard firmware and the LCD firmware. All right, so we've gone to Insanity Automation's GitHub, So this is Tiny Machines repo. And in this area here, there is the Marlin firmware as well as the DWIN set folder. So this is the screen firmware for the CRX and the CR-10s Pro, which we're interested in. So I've clicked clone and download, downloaded a zip file of this, and I've extracted that to my desktop. So on my desktop, I now have a Marlin Creality DWIN test folder. And in Marlin, I'm going to open the marlin.ino file, which should open the Arduino IDE. While that's going, we're going to do the LCD firmware. So if I go to this PC, I've got a micro SD in here under USB drive, and we're going to format that to make sure it's formatted correctly. So you want it FAT32, and you want to change the allocation unit size to 4096. Hit start. It'll give you a warning. It's going to erase everything on the SD card. That's what we're expecting. That should only take a minute, and then we now have an empty card. So on that now empty card, we can take the inside the CR-10s Pro folder, take this entire folder, and put it on the SD card. So when you go to your SD card, you should see just a DWIN set folder, nothing else. So at this point, I'm going to eject that because that's ready to be inserted into the printer. And back to the Marlin firmware and the Arduino IDE. We need to make a couple changes here. So in configuration.h, we're going to make sure the correct machine is defined here, machine CR-10s Pro, even though it still says it hasn't seen real hardware yet. And then we want to uncomment a line about 90 something, 93. Yeah. So define a BLTouch as to enable the BLTouch. And then we should be able to just flash this. So let's make sure we have the correct parameters here. The board is not a Sanguino. I was obviously working on something like an under 3 before. So the board is an Arduino Mega 2560. So then this changes to 2560. The port, only got one active, so I'll choose that. And just to double check, AVR ISP-MK2. So I'm ready to flash. This will take a little while to compile the firmware, and then it'll flash it to the board, and we should see a success message at the bottom here. Rookie mistake. So I've had actually a lot of customers ask me why they're having trouble flashing when they get error messages like this. So I figured I'd kind of explain what happened here. I have Cura open. And so Cura automatically binds to your serial ports as they're connected. So the moment I plugged in my printer, it's kind of hogging the serial port on me, the COM port. So I need to close Cura. I have a couple instances of it open. Okay. And now at this point, I'll be able to upload and flash. And because it's already compiled it, it should really be pretty quick in that regard. And then it will hopefully, now that the port is freed up, start uploading it to the machine. All right, it's done uploading, and you hear the jingle there. The printer has restarted itself. We're done in the Arduino IDE, and we're ready to plug in the micro SD into the screen. I've disconnected my laptop from the printer. The printer is off. I've got the micro SD card, and we'll flip this guy back over. And so where we want to place this is in the back of the screen right here. If you've watched our D9, Wanhao D9 videos for the firmware updating, it's almost identical. And then the moment we power it back on, we're going to see a bunch of activity on the screen with all the new images and the flashing process. All right, so at the top you see SD card process. You should see a bunch of images flash on the screen. And then the top line will say SD card process end when it's finished. All right, SD card process end. So we can switch the unit off, take out the SD card, and let's give it a whirl. So now you see the screen actually has a different kind of logo. It says prepared by Tiny Machines 3D. Still has the jingle. So we know obviously the firmware flash for the screen has taken place. So let's start by homing. So the BLTouch probe has descended. There's no reason that this shouldn't work. We'll just have to wait for it to get to the bottom. So I was a little bit surprised to see it not go directly to the center of the bed for the homing. Z-safe homing would normally go 50% of the bed width and depth and home there. It did the standard kind of 2 probes, first a little bit quicker than the second, but that all seems to work. And right now it says that the Z-axis is at 5 millimeters. And if we bring it down 1 millimeter at a time, so we're gonna have to do a little bit of Z offset calibration there to make sure that the nozzle is actually on the bed when the machine thinks that it's at Z equals 0. So to set the Z offset, go to the leveling menu. The printer will home all axes, and it will bring the BLTouch down, sense the bed, and then bring the nozzle down to what it thinks home is from a Z perspective. And then we'll use the 0.2 millimeter feeler gauge that came with the printer to verify the height. So right now, the bed and nozzle are both up to temperature. So I'm doing all of this at temperature. And I can slide this right through. So the nozzle needs to come down a little bit. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, you see Z home plus and minus. This is gonna move at 0.1 millimeters at a time. So if I hit that -1, it's now exactly where it needs to be. A little bit of tension on this 0.2 millimeter feeler gauge, but I don't have to kind of force it in to raise the hot end up to fit this under. It fits perfectly snugly. So hit Z home to set that value. It will re-home just the Z. And then we can kind of verify this by going out and go to the move menu. It will tell you right now that the Z axis, it thinks it's at 0.2, and it is definitely at 0.2. I can actually feel like almost the vibration from the fan in the feeler gauge. And if I move the Z in 0.1 millimeter increments, and I move it down to 0.1 total, down to 0.0, it is exactly touching the bed. So we've set the Z offset, and that's been saved. And now we could go back to leveling, and I could turn on auto leveling and allow it to probe the bed. I haven't done any manual adjustments to this bed, so it may be completely out of whack. We'll see what we get on the screen here. Ideally, the bed should be manually leveled. The sensor is kind of there to get you that last little bit, but just for demonstration purposes, we'll leave it as is. So, and we'll do measuring. And this will go through the grid pattern of probing the bed. Okay, so it's done the ABL probe sequence, and then it returned to the very center of the bed. And on the screen, we see the readings for how unlevel my bed is. So looking at that, I have a little bit of work to do as far as leveling the corners goes. I would run this again, and then we'll be ready to do a test print. So stay tuned, that's coming up shortly. So now you're ready to add a BLTouch to yet another of your printers. Hopefully you found that useful. Remember to like and subscribe. Leave me a comment down below if you have any questions about this or any of the other videos you've seen on our channel. And let us know what you'd like to see in the future, including test prints on the CR-10s Pro. Thanks for watching.